Tonight, a former Marine finally opens the drawer he's avoided for years, and what falls out is not just a piece of paper, but the very reason he can't sleep, can't heal, and can't forgive himself. Why didn't he send the letter? Why did the war take his marriage but not his life? And what does a German shepherd know that even a broken man refuses to admit? Stay with this story until the end, because the answer isn't about war or death or even regret. It's about the one thing we all hope for: a second chance before it's too late. If you believe some wounds are meant to be healed, if you believe God still works quietly in broken places, then don't scroll, watch. And before we begin, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. Leave a like if the story touches you. And thank you, truly, for being here. Let's begin. The first cold breath of early fall settled over Clearwater County, Idaho. The kind of mountain cold that didn't wait for night to deepen before claiming the air. The sky above the lake was a washed-out gray, heavy enough to press the smell of wet pine down toward the earth. A wind rolled off the water and shook the branches of the tall lodgepole pines, scattering needles across the old gravel road that led to a small, weather-beaten cabin, its roof patched, its porch sagging slightly, as if tired of carrying the weight of seasons no one had bothered to name anymore. Walter pushed the door open with his shoulder, letting the draft follow him inside before he shut it out. The hinges groaned the way old metal does when it's been asked to hang on longer than it was meant to. He dropped a scuffed duffel to the floor and exhaled, not the sigh of a man exhausted, but of a man settling into a place that wasn't home, and maybe never would be, no matter how long he stayed. He looked like a man who had once been sharp-edged and unbreakable, then sanded down by time and memory. Walter stood a little over 6 feet, still broad through the shoulders, though age had thinned him at the waist and carved deeper lines into his face. His hair, once black, was now a short, iron-gray bristle that matched the stubble across his jaw. A thin diagonal scar cut through his left eyebrow and into his cheekbone, the kind that hinted at a story no one ever got to hear. His eyes were pale blue, not cold, but tired in a way that suggested they had spent years seeing things they never asked to see. His clothes, faded jeans, a field jacket frayed at the cuffs, looked like they had been worn through more than just weather. The German shepherd padded in behind him, nose twitching, tail level but relaxed. Rex was 5 years old, large and strong, with a black saddle marking and rich tan fur over his chest and legs. His ears stayed upright, always listening, always filtering the world for threats that might not exist, but still felt possible. A faint scar cut through the fur on his right ear, a small crescent as if the world had tried once to mark him and failed. His walk had confidence, but his eyes had softness. An animal who watched over a man, not just followed him. Walter started unpacking in quiet, methodical movements. A folded wool blanket, a dented thermos, a steel mug with scratches instead of shine. Everything placed where it belonged, not because he cared about neatness, but because putting things in order was one of the few things life still allowed him to control. Rex watched, then hopped onto the bed to steal a better view. His paw caught the sleeve of a jacket lying there, tugging it to the floor. A soft thump, then a thin rectangle of something paper slid out from the inside pocket. Walter froze before he even looked down, like his body recognized the sound before his mind gave it permission. He slowly bent, picked up the object. An envelope, yellowed, edges softened by years of being carried, but never used. Handwriting faded by time and maybe regret. To Sarah, if I don't make it home. The wind outside rattled the single window, as if the world insisted on reacting even when Walter didn't. His hand trembled, not violently, just enough to betray that the paper weighed more than it should. He didn't open it, didn't even breathe for a moment. He just stared at the words, at the name, at the possibility that time hadn't buried everything the way he once hoped. Sarah. The name lived in him the way a scar lived beneath clothing, quiet, unannounced, but always there. She had been tall, just an inch shorter than him, with long, dark blonde hair she used to braid loosely over her shoulder. Not because it was fashionable, but because she liked her hands to be free when she worked. Her skin tanned easily in summer, picking up amber tones that made her eyes, soft hazel, sharp when angry, glow like something lit from within. She laughed with her whole face, not just her mouth. She argued with fire, then forgave with silence. She carried both gentleness and stubbornness in equal measure, as if the world had tried to make her choose softness or strength, and she simply refused. And he had loved her. And he had failed her. And the letter in his hand was proof that he knew it long before life forced him to admit it. Rex moved closer and sat beside him, head lifting to meet Walter's distant stare. The dog didn't whine, didn't push into him, just watched, steady and present in a way that never demanded an answer. Walter finally set the envelope on the table like a fragile artifact. He didn't open it, but his thumb lingered on the crease, the way a man touches something he has both missed and feared. He turned away, lit the small propane stove, filled a kettle with water. The scrape of metal, the click of ignition, the low blue flame, sounds that filled the room without asking for anything. The letter stayed on the table, staring back at him like an unopened confession. Outside, wind dragged a thin branch across the cabin wall. Inside, the kettle began to hum. Walter's voice was low when he finally spoke. Not to anyone, not even fully to himself, just to the air that had waited long enough. "I thought I buried all this." Rex shifted, tail tapping once against the floorboards, soft, understanding. The kettle whistled. Walter didn't move to silence it. The envelope lay untouched, but the past was no longer quiet. There are letters humans never send, not because they forget, but because they're afraid the answer will hurt more than the silence. The morning came slow and colorless, the kind of pale light that didn't warm anything, only revealed it. A thin blanket of mist still hovered over Clearwater Lake, turning the water into a sheet of quiet silver. Walter sat on an old wooden chair outside the cabin, boots planted on the cold planks, both hands wrapped around a tin mug that had long gone lukewarm. The steam had stopped rising minutes ago, but he hadn't noticed. His attention was somewhere far beyond the tree line. Rex lay beside him, the German shepherd's head resting across Walter's boot, ears half raised in that patient, listening way dogs had when silence meant something was about to be spoken. He didn't move, didn't push, didn't demand, just waited, because waiting was a language he understood. Walter didn't begin with words. He began with a breath, the kind that had weight to it. "I told her I'd come back the same man," he said finally, voice low, as if testing whether the air would accept the memory or reject it. Whole, untouched. Like war was just a place I'd pass through. He shook his head once with a humorless breath of air. "I didn't know how much of me would get left over there." Sarah had been 28 when he deployed. Young, but not naive. She had the kind of beauty that wasn't porcelain or fragile, but strong-lined and warm. Tall, slim, but not delicate, with that dark blonde braid she tied over her shoulder like a signature. Her hazel eyes always looked like they held two thoughts at the same time, one soft, one sharp. Her hands were steady whether she was tying back her hair, fixing a loose screw on a cabinet door, or pressing against Walter's jaw when he was too angry at something that wasn't her. She used to hum, Walter said, eyes fixed somewhere in memory instead of here. Didn't matter what she was doing, cooking, reading, sewing, she had this quiet tune. I swear half the time I never knew what song it was. She just filled the silence. The silence now felt like an accusation. Rex lifted his head, watching him. Walter didn't look at the dog, but he reached down and absently brushed his fingers over the fur at Rex's shoulder. When I came back, she tried, he said quietly. Tried harder than I deserved. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I was still over there. I'd hear a car backfire and be under the table before I even understood why. I couldn't stand crowded rooms. I couldn't stand myself. He rubbed his jaw, not to soothe it, but to occupy his hand. And when I got angry, it wasn't at her. But she was the only one in the room. That's how it goes. Anyone who stays close enough ends up taking fire meant for the ghosts. He didn't raise his voice, but something tightened in it. Gravel on old wounds. She begged me to talk to someone, to get help. I told her I didn't need help. I told her I wasn't broken. He paused. Turns out the only ones who say they aren't broken are the ones bleeding the worst. Rex shifted, pressing his body closer against Walter's leg, as if to replace an apology no one had ever given or received. There was this one night, Walter continued, eyes narrowing slightly like he was replaying the room, the walls, the shape of it. Storm outside, thunder shaking the window. I couldn't breathe. I thought the house was closing in. I shoved her when she tried to grab me, harder than I meant, harder than she ever deserved. His voice fell to almost nothing. She didn't cry, just stood there, and she said, I don't know how to love someone I'm scared of. He swallowed. Even the breeze seemed to hesitate. It took her 3 more months to leave, not because she wanted to, but because she had nothing left to fight with. Walter leaned back in the chair, looking at the lake like it carried answers it had no obligation to give. If I had written the letter then, he said, nodding toward the cabin behind him where the envelope still waited on the table. Maybe things would have been different. Maybe not. But I didn't write it then. I wrote it when I thought I'd never make it back. And when I did make it back, I was too much of a coward to send it. Rex lowered his head again, resting his chin on Walter's boot, a silent anchor to the present. Walter didn't cry, but his voice sounded like a man standing in the ruins of a house he once tried to build. People say war takes men away from the ones they love, he said, almost to himself. But that's not it. War sends them back, just not as the same men. He exhaled, slow and tired, the kind of exhale that felt like surrender, not relief. And she deserved the man I promised to be, not the one I came home as. Rex blinked once, eyes steady, accepting, waiting without judgment. Humans say they lose each other because of war, but it's not the battlefield that breaks them. It's what they bring home afterward. Night settled over the cabin in a slow, deliberate way, the kind that made the walls feel closer and the silence feel heavier. Rain tapped the windows. Not a storm, not thunder, just the soft, persistent kind of northern drizzle that sounded like thoughts instead of weather. The lamp on the table cast a warm circle of light, and inside that circle lay the envelope that had waited years longer than it was meant to. Walter sat at the table for a long time before touching it again. He didn't rush, didn't panic. He moved like a man who had already fought the hardest part, and now only the truth was left. Rex lay close to his chair, front paws stretched, head up, ears alert but calm, always watching him the way only a German shepherd could, as if he tracked not the room, but the man's pulse beneath it. Walter picked up the envelope and slid a finger along the crease, opening it with the same care someone might use for a wound they knew would bleed again. The paper inside was still whole. No mold, no water damage, just the faint yellowing of time. He unfolded it, and the words stared up at him like something preserved in glass, untouched, but never forgotten. He didn't read it out loud. It wasn't the kind of letter meant for an audience. It was written by a man who thought he would never speak again, to a woman he wasn't sure would ever hear him. If you're reading this, it means I didn't come home. And I'm sorry for all the things I didn't say before I left, and all the things I should have said while I still could. You told me once that love wasn't about staying, it was about returning. I believed you. I believed I could walk into a war and walk out the same man. I was wrong before I even boarded the plane. If I die over there, I want you to know I never stopped loving you. If I live and still never send this letter, then maybe I came home, but not as the man you deserved. Walter let the paper rest in his hands, shoulders sinking, jaw tightening, not with anger, but something quieter, heavier. Regret was not loud. It was slow. It hollowed a man from the inside. She deserved better than the man I became, he said, voice low, gravelly, not broken but worn. Rex shifted closer, placing his chin on Walter's knee. His fur was warm, grounding. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the weight. Walter's gaze drifted to a framed photograph leaning against a stack of unpacked books. Sarah, in a sunlit backyard, hair loose instead of braided, laughing at something just out of frame. She looked alive in a way that didn't need permission from the past. Beside her was a younger version of Walter, broad-shouldered, clean haircut, strong posture, eyes sharp with certainty instead of loss. There was someone else in the photo, too, someone half out of frame. A man in civilian clothes, hand on Walter's shoulder, smiling, a friend. Someone Walter hadn't mentioned in years. Someone he didn't speak of because some memories were tied to graves instead of stories. He turned the frame down so the glass faced the table. The rain outside thickened, pattering like small knocks against the window. Walter folded the letter carefully, not like something finished, but like something paused. He slipped it back into the envelope and placed it near the edge of the table, close enough to touch again, far enough that he didn't have to. He stared at it for a moment before murmuring, "Maybe it's not too late to send it. Maybe it's too late to change anything, but not too late to say what should have been said." Rex's ears twitched at the tone. He didn't move, just waited, eyes steady, as if holding space for the decision that hadn't yet formed. Walter leaned back in his chair, exhaled, and looked toward the door. Not like he expected someone to walk through it, but as if imagining the version of himself who never left for war at all. The kettle on the stove clicked as it cooled. The clock on the wall kept ticking like a reminder that time didn't pause just because a man did. Walter didn't cry. That part of him had burned out years ago. But the silence he sat in was not empty. It was crowded with everything he never said, and everything he now wished he had. Rex finally broke the stillness with a soft whine. Not asking, not demanding, just reminding him that the present still existed. Walter reached down, ran a hand over Rex's neck and said, almost to himself, "Letters are just words until they reach someone. Maybe it's time this one finally did. The rain kept falling. The lamp flickered once. The past did not answer, but it stopped hiding. I don't understand letters, but I understand this. Some apologies arrive late and still matter, if the human has the courage to send them. Morning arrived cleaner than the night before. The rain gone, the sky washed in a pale blue that made the pines look sharper and the lake brighter. The air still carried a bite of cold, but sunlight finally reached the porch of the cabin, touching the wood like something trying to make peace with it. Walter walked the gravel road into town with Rex at his side, the German shepherd keeping pace with the steady rhythm of his boots. The letter was in the inside pocket of Walter's jacket, the crease still sharp from years of being unfolded and refolded only in thought. Clearwater's town center wasn't much more than a gas station, a diner with a faded mural on the side, and a small brick post office built sometime in the 1950s, back when stamps cost less than a cup of diner coffee, and people still believed mail carried things heavier than bills. A flag flapped on a short pole outside, threads on the corners pulled and loose from the Idaho wind. The parking lot held a pickup with rusted wheel wells and a dusty sedan that looked 2 decades past its promise. Walter stopped just before the steps, Rex sitting neatly beside his left boot, ears pricked forward, quiet and watchful. The door to the post office had a bell taped above it instead of properly mounted, and it rattled in the breeze like something determined to stay functional long after its purpose had faded. Walter didn't move for a moment. He let the silence stretch out, the weight of the letter pressing against his chest. Not in size, not in paper, but in every hour he hadn't sent it. "I don't know if she wants to hear from me," he murmured, his voice thin but steady. "But I think I need to say it anyway." Rex turned his head slightly, as if listening not to the words, but to the space between them. Walter reached into his jacket, the envelope between his fingers again. For a second, he saw not the post office, not the road, but Sarah at a kitchen table years ago, reading mail with the calm focus she used for everything that mattered. He could almost picture her holding this letter, confused first, then hurt, then maybe, just maybe, relieved that something unspoken finally had a voice. He took a step forward, then stopped. The door to the post office opened from the inside, and a man stepped out, letting the bell jingle against the glass. He looked to be in his early 60s, stocky, with a salt and pepper beard trimmed close to his jaw. His jacket bore the logo of a local fishing guide service, sun-faded and stitched twice at the elbow. His hands were thick, the kind used to pulling ropes or repairing engines, and his eyes were the unhurried kind, like someone who had learned the long way that rushing rarely makes life kinder. He nodded politely. "Morning." Walter returned the nod. "Morning." The man gave Rex a small smile, the instinctive kind dog people never had to learn. "Good-looking shepherd you've got there. He's trained?" Walter glanced down at Rex, who sat perfectly still, gaze forward. "Trained enough to know when not to bark," he said. The reply came with a ghost of a smile, one that left as quickly as it arrived. The man chuckled lightly. Wish people had that skill. He didn't linger, just walked to his truck, started the engine, and pulled away. A brief human interruption, nothing more. But it had broken the stillness just enough for Walter to feel the moment slipping. Not gone, but not the same. He looked back at the envelope. Maybe sending a letter wasn't as simple as pushing it through a slot. Maybe it was a kind of promise, and promises were harder when they were late. He exhaled, long and quiet. Then, without forcing himself to decide, he tucked the envelope back into his jacket pocket. "Not yet," he said. Like a verdict he believed more than he understood. "Not until I deal with Tyler first." Rex stood when he did, tail low, posture calm, ready to follow the way soldiers once followed commands, silent, loyal, unquestioning. Walter turned away from the post office and started walking back toward the cabin, boots crunching over gravel, wind pushing at his collar. He didn't walk like a man avoiding something. He walked like a man postponing something until he felt worthy of doing it. Before the road curved out of sight, he looked back once, not at the building, not at the mailbox he could have used, but at the place where he had stood still long enough to feel the weight of choosing not to choose. Humans don't just travel to reach somewhere. Sometimes they travel to build the courage to return to where they left. Night rose slowly over the Idaho mountains, clear and sharp enough that every star looked close enough to touch. The lake reflected the sky like a second world, one where nothing was broken, nothing lost, and nothing needed to be repaired. A small campfire crackled at the edge of the water, throwing light against Walter's face in shifting orange flickers. He sat on a fallen log, back slightly hunched, hands loose between his knees, as if the fire had called him to stillness instead of warmth. Rex lay close to him, the German shepherd's body stretched along the ground, head resting on his paws, ears pricked toward the sounds of the night. His fur reflected the firelight in warm amber tones, his eyes alert but calm, the gaze of a creature who didn't need to understand words to understand mood. The flame popped once, sending a small ember skyward, and Rex followed its rise until it vanished into darkness. Walter placed 2 objects on the flat stone beside him, the unopened letter to Sarah and a thin silver chain with a small dog tag attached. The tag belonged to Tyler, young, eager, full of the kind of conviction Walter once carried like armor. The chain was worn but not corroded, the etched letters still sharp. Tyler's full name, rank, blood type. Things meant to keep a soldier alive, even when the world tried not to. Walter ran his thumb over the metal, slow and careful, as if afraid he might erase the name if he pressed too hard. "Tomorrow, we take him back where he belongs," he said quietly. Not in the tone of someone rehearsing, but finishing a promise that no longer asked to be spoken aloud. The air was cold, not the aching kind, but the clear kind that made thought simpler, truer, the kind that stripped a man down to whatever he could still live with. "Tyler wasn't supposed to be the one who stayed behind," Walter continued. "He was faster than me, better shot, quicker thinker." He gave a short breath, not quite a laugh. "And too damn young to be the one the war chose." The fire cracked again, and the lake answered with a soft ripple. Tyler had been 22. Lean build, quick grin, dark hair always cut too short because he hated the way helmets felt when his hair grew out. He had the kind of face that stayed open even when he was afraid, brown eyes that didn't flinch from bad news, but absorbed it the way a stone absorbed rain. He was friendly to everyone, even the men who didn't want friends. He asked questions, not to fill silence, but to understand the world the way someone still believed it could be fixed. Walter blinked, but the memory didn't disappear. Some stayed because they were earned. "He looked at me like I had answers," he said, voice rough, "and I let him believe I did." Rex shifted closer, placing his chin on Walter's boot, the same way he had done in the cabin, small, steady weight, like a tether to the present. Walter inhaled deeply, cold air tightening his chest. And I owe him more than silence. And I owe her more than pretending the past never happened. The letter rested beside the chain, edges golden in the firelight. One belonged to the dead. One belonged to the living. And both had waited too long. Rex lifted his head, ears angled at Walter's voice, eyes steady and unreadable in the way only animals can be. Not because they lack emotion, but because they don't disguise it. You know, Walter murmured. People think war ends when the shooting stops, but sometimes the longest part is what comes afterward. His gaze fixed on the fire, but his thoughts were somewhere far older, far heavier. I'm tired of carrying both ghosts at once, he said. Tomorrow we say goodbye to him, and maybe after that, I'll finally say goodbye to the war. Rex didn't make a sound, but he stayed close, unmoving, as if guarding the last quiet before something irreversible began. The fire burned low. The stars held their distance. The night did not offer answers, but it did not ask for any either. I don't know what tomorrow will be, but I know a man can't hold two sorrows forever. One of them has to be set down, and I hope it will be both. Sometimes the greatest miracles are not the ones that change the world around us, but the ones that finally change the world inside us. Someone survives a war. Someone forgives a wound that never got an apology. Someone dares to send a letter that should have been sent years ago. And sometimes, just sometimes, God lets the broken things become whole again. Maybe you're carrying something too heavy. Maybe you've kept a silence too long. Maybe there's someone you still haven't said I'm sorry or I love you to. If this story has taught us anything, it's this. It is never too late to lay down a burden. It is never too late to forgive. And it is never too late for God to turn pain into peace. If you felt something while watching this story, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video so someone else may feel it too. Leave a comment below and tell us what part touched you the most. And if you want more stories like this, about hope, healing, and second chances, make sure to hit subscribe because we're just getting started. May God bless you, protect your family, and remind you that no tear is wasted, no prayer is ignored, and no heart is too damaged to be rebuilt. God bless everyone watching this video. May He give you peace for today, strength for tomorrow, and grace for every unseen battle.